was 2 a.m. I was lying in bed, eyes wide open, replaying a conversation from 3 days ago. You know that feeling? The one where you wish you'd said something smarter, clearer, more confident, and instead you're running every possible version of what you could have said through your head like a broken record. What I've learned is this: overthinking isn't a character flaw, it's a survival strategy. Our brains are wired to scan, analyze, and predict. It's how we've stayed alive for thousands of years. But here's the truth no one really tells you. At some point, overthinking stops protecting you and starts paralyzing you. What if, instead of analyzing every detail, you just did the thing? What if action wasn't the reward for clarity, but the path to it? Overthinking is the armor we wear to avoid vulnerability. Let's be honest, overthinking feels safe. It gives us this illusion of control. We believe that if we just run the scenario one more time in our minds, if we just anticipate every possible outcome, we'll be protected from embarrassment, failure, disappointment. We treat overthinking like it's a strategy, when most of the time it's a shield. When I started noticing this pattern in my own life, it hit hard. I wasn't overthinking because I was diligent or detail-oriented. I was overthinking because I was scared. I was afraid of being seen getting it wrong, of saying the wrong thing, of stepping into a space where I might not be enough. So instead of acting, I thought. I overthought. I hid behind planning and preparing, thinking that somehow that would make me feel safe enough to begin. And here's what the research shows. This kind of mental rumination, the repetitive cycle of worry and what if, is often our nervous system trying to manage vulnerability. It's a form of self-protection. The problem is it's incredibly expensive, not in money, but in energy, creativity, connection. We get stuck in our heads, and the cost is showing up in our lives. We use overthinking like armor, hoping it will protect us from the discomfort of uncertainty or the shame of being imperfect, but all it really does is keep us stuck. And ironically, that armor doesn't just keep the bad stuff out, it also keeps the good stuff out. The joy, the opportunity, the growth. It's like we're standing behind this glass wall watching life happen, convincing ourselves we're being smart for not moving. But action is vulnerable because it requires exposure. It requires letting people see us try, maybe even fail. It requires saying, I don't have it all figured out, but I'm going to show up anyway. And that's the moment where things start to shift. Because when we drop the armor, even just a little, we start to breathe again. We start to live again. And the truth is, courage doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from being willing to ask better questions and then take the next step, even if it's a shaky one. Clarity comes through action, not before it. We spend so much time waiting for the light bulb moment, don't we? That magical instant when everything makes sense, when all the dots connect and we suddenly feel ready. We think that if we just wait long enough, read one more book, take one more course, talk to one more person, we'll finally get the clarity we need to move forward. But here's what I've learned. That moment rarely, if ever, comes before we take action. It shows up because we take action. The belief that we need to feel clear before we act is a lie we've all been sold. It sounds responsible, it sounds wise, but it often masks our fear of failure or rejection. We use the phrase, I'm not ready yet, as a cushion, as a way to delay doing the thing that scares us. But the longer we wait, the foggier everything becomes. Clarity doesn't live in the planning phase, it lives in the doing. Neuroscience actually backs this up. Our brains build understanding through movement, through trial and error, through engagement with the world, not through sitting in isolation, replaying mental loops. When we take action, especially imperfect, messy, uncertain action, we generate feedback. And it's that feedback that gives us direction. We figure out what works, what doesn't, what matters, and what doesn't matter as much as we thought. I've seen this again and again in myself, in my research, in the leaders and teams I've worked with. the ones who made real change, weren't the ones who waited until they had a flawless plan. They were the ones who said, I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to try. They acted their way into clarity. They stumbled into insight. And that stumbling, that awkward, vulnerable process is where growth lives. And let me be real with you. Acting without clarity can feel incredibly uncomfortable. There's no script, no guarantee, but every time you take a step, you're building trust, not just with the world, but with yourself. You're learning that you can handle uncertainty, that you're capable of figuring it out as you go, and that lesson, that's worth far more than perfect clarity could ever give you. Small wins disarm the inner critic. That voice in your head, the one that says you're not ready, or you're going to screw this up, or who do you think you are? It doesn't disappear just because you've read all the right books or listened to all the right podcasts. Trust me, I've tried. That voice doesn't get quieter because you've overcompared. It gets quieter when you move. It gets quieter when you do the thing, even just a little bit, and prove to yourself that you're more capable than the critic wants you to believe. One of the most effective ways I've found to shift the power dynamic between me and my inner critic is through small wins. I'm not talking about dramatic, life-changing accomplishments. I'm talking about tiny, often unimpressive steps that send a quiet but powerful message to your nervous system. See? I did that. Maybe it's sending the email you've been avoiding. Maybe it's speaking up in a meeting, even if your voice shakes. Maybe it's just starting one paragraph, making one phone call, getting out of bed and choosing not to numb. These little moments don't look like much from the outside, but on the inside, they're everything. Because what you're really doing is building self-trust. You're creating evidence in our inner critic. It thrives in the absence of evidence. It loves the vacuum of inaction, because that's where fear gets to run wild and unchecked. There's something incredibly grounding about being able to say, I didn't just think about it, I did it. Even if it was messy, even if it was a little embarrassing, even if it didn't go perfectly. When you take action, you chip away at the shame and doubt that love to take up residence in the silence. You disrupt the stories that say you're not enough, because you're not just telling yourself that you're trying, you're showing yourself. And those wins add up. Small wins turn into big shifts. The steps you thought didn't matter start to build momentum. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, trust differently, not because the critic is gone, but because you've stopped letting it sit in the driver's seat. Momentum doesn't start with confidence, it starts with motion. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is take the tiniest step forward and whisper to ourselves, this counts. Courage isn't loud, it's movement in the presence of fear. We often picture courage as this bold, dramatic act, charging into a room, standing on a stage, making a huge leap. But most of the time, real courage doesn't look like that. It looks like showing up when everything in you wants to hide. It looks like having the conversation you've been avoiding. It looks like taking the next step when your hands are shaking and your voice is small. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move with it. I used to think I had to wait for fear to go away before I could act, that I had to feel brave in order to be brave. But what I learned, what I continue to learn, is that bravery is often quiet. It's not accompanied by a soundtrack. It's not always Instagrammable. Sometimes courage is just a whisper in the middle of the chaos that says, do it anyway. Fear is part of the human experience. It's not something we can eliminate. It's part of our wiring. It's there to protect us. But the problem is fear isn't always accurate. It doesn't know the difference between emotional risk and physical danger. It just says, this is unfamiliar, so let's back off. If we wait until we feel completely safe, we never move. What changes everything is when we stop seeing fear as a red light and start seeing it as a companion. Not the driver, not the decision maker, just a part of the journey. Because if fear is present, it often means we're doing something meaningful, something that matters, something that stretches us. I've seen so many people, leaders, parents, creatives, students, step forward while being afraid, not after they've conquered their fear, right in the middle of it. And what I've noticed is that those are the moments that define them. Not because they were flawless, not because they had it all figured out, but because they chose to move anyway. That's courage. And here's the secret. Every time you act in the presence of fear, your capacity for courage grows. You expand. You build proof that you can feel discomfort and still keep going. And little by little, your life starts to change. Not because the fear is gone, but because it no longer controls your choices. Acting aligns us with our values faster than thinking ever will. You can spend months, years even, thinking about the kind of person you want to be, the kind of life you want to live, the values you want to stand for. And that kind of reflection matters. But here's what I've seen in myself and in others. We don't become the person we want to be by thinking about it. We become that person through the choices we make when it's hard, when we're scared, when no one's watching, through action. Values aren't something we write down once in a journal and call it done. They're something we practice. And the only way we know if we're living into our values is by how we show up, especially under pressure. When I say I value honesty, but I avoid a hard conversation because it's uncomfortable, that gap between what I say I believe and what I actually do, that's where shame creeps in. That's where disconnection grows. And it's not because I'm a bad person, it's because I'm out of alignment. But the tricky thing is that overthinking loves to disguise itself as responsibility. We'll say things like, I just need more time to figure it out, or I want to make sure I'm doing it right. But underneath that is often the fear that if we act, we'll be exposed, that we'll get it wrong, that we'll disappoint someone. But the longer we stay in that loop, the more disconnected we become from our core values, not intentionally, but gradually, quietly, subtly. Those powerful shifts I've ever experienced happened when I stopped trying to get it right in my head and just started doing the next right thing. Not the perfect thing, not the impressive thing, just the thing that felt honest, true, real. That's where alignment lives, in the decisions we make in real time, not in the ideals we carry in our heads. And the beautiful part is, once we start acting in alignment with our values, even in small ways, something inside begins to settle. There's less mental noise, less internal tension, not because life gets easier, but because we get clearer. We start to recognize ourselves again, not the edited version, but the real one. And there's nothing more grounding than that. So here's the heart of it. Overthinking promises safety, but it rarely delivers. It tells us we're being responsible, when really we're often just scared. And that's okay, fear is human. But you were never meant to live your whole life in your head. Life isn't happening in the perfectly rehearsed version of your story. It's happening in the imperfect, vulnerable, beautifully messy moments when you decide to act. When you start moving, no matter how small the steps, you begin to rewrite the story. You begin to trade anxiety for clarity, fear for forward motion, self-doubt for self-trust. Not because the fear is gone, but because you've chosen to stop letting it call the shots. You'll still stumble, you'll still question yourself, but you'll be in it, you'll be alive in your own life again. So if you're standing on the edge of something, waiting for the right time, the perfect moment, the full confidence, I want to tell you it's not coming, but you can. You can take the first step. You can show up, heart pounding, voice trembling, and say, I'm doing it anyway. That's how we build a life with meaning. That's how we become who we're meant to be, not all at once, but moment by moment, step by step, act by act. Good luck, and may your next move be a bold one. even if it's small. You've got this.